why the decision was made the way that it was in 2020. The hardest thing for me has been the fix of that decision for the last 5 years.
For years, the monarchy stayed silent. The cold distance between King Charles III and Prince Harry was the subject of endless speculation, whispered about in drawing rooms and dissected by tabloids, yet never addressed. But now, that silence has shattered. In a move that stunned the public and broke generations of royal protocol, King Charles has finally acknowledged the fracture within his own bloodline. His words didn't come through a formal palace statement or a carefully orchestrated interview. They surfaced like a sudden crack in the crown's porcelain image, raw, unguarded, and impossible to ignore. And in those few moments of candor, a door creaked open into a truth long buried under royal discretion. The king's words were not filled with rage or blame. They were laced with something far more piercing: sorrow. Not the performative grief of a monarch, but the unmistakable pain of a father watching his own son drift further into the abyss. He admitted the toll that the past 5 years had taken, the difficulty of a decision that had spiraled into something irreversible. This wasn't a political stance. It was a confession, one that had been simmering beneath the surface of Buckingham Palace for far too long. What made this revelation even more shocking was the timing. As tensions with Prince Harry continued to bubble just beneath the surface, the king could have continued to say nothing. But instead, he chose to speak. And by doing so, he broke ranks with a tradition as old as the monarchy itself. Never explain, never complain. In the royal family, silence is survival. Yet Charles chose to speak because the silence had become unbearable. The world reacted with a mix of shock and sympathy. Some saw it as a long overdue gesture of accountability. Others questioned whether it was too little, too late. But no one could deny the weight of what had just happened. For a monarch so new to the throne and so cautious in his steps, this was a risk. A deeply personal matter had just become public by the king's own doing. And once those words left his lips, there was no taking them back. This moment didn't just expose the pain between a father and a son, it ripped open the facade that the monarchy had desperately tried to maintain. It proved that behind palace walls, even royalty is not immune to heartbreak. That beneath the medals, titles, and centuries-old traditions, there is still flesh and blood. Still bruises that never fully healed. But if Charles was finally ready to speak, what else had been left unsaid? What events pushed him to this breaking point? Was it Harry's memoir? The interviews? Or something even deeper? Something we've never seen on camera? To understand the true scale of this rupture, we have to rewind back to the moment Prince Harry walked away, not just from royal duties, but from the very identity he had worn since birth. A choice that defied tradition, a choice that would change everything. The announcement came like thunder in a quiet room. In January 2020, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle released a joint statement that sent shockwaves through the foundations of Buckingham Palace. They were stepping back from their senior royal duties, not retiring, not renouncing, but choosing something the monarchy had never truly allowed: freedom on their own terms. The world paused, stunned. The headlines called it Megxit, a term that trivialized a decision so personal, so loaded, it would reshape royal history. But behind the media circus and sensational soundbites was a far more haunting question: had they broken free? Or simply broken apart? For Harry, this wasn't a whim. It was the result of years of quiet anguish. Years spent walking a path he never chose. The death of his mother had already marked him with the scars of royal life. And when Meghan entered that gilded world, she too became engulfed by the suffocating expectations, relentless scrutiny, and thinly veiled racism embedded in the system. What began as a fairy tale wedding soon unraveled into a psychological war behind palace walls. The couple watched as their every move was dissected, their motives questioned, their loyalty doubted not by enemies, but by the very institution they were supposed to serve. North America became the answer. Or at least, they hoped it would be. Palm trees instead of palace gates. Freedom instead of formality. But with the flight came fallout. Their announcement blindsided the royal family. The Queen was reportedly hurt. Prince William was said to be furious, and King Charles, then still the Prince of Wales, chose caution over confrontation. The monarchy wasn't just blindsided, it was embarrassed. For a family built on order and control, this was chaos dressed in designer suits and Instagram statements. Yet what shocked them even more was what Harry and Meghan proposed next. They didn't want out entirely. At first, the couple hoped for a hybrid role, half in, half out. A modernized monarchy where they could still serve the crown while pursuing independent financial ventures. But for the royal establishment, that idea was heresy. You were either royal or you weren't. No middle ground, no negotiating tradition. The monarchy feared blurred lines would invite scandal, raise questions about funding, and tarnish the aura of dignity they'd worked centuries to maintain. So, they shut the door. Firmly. The Sussexes were left with a choice: stay and be silent, or leave and speak their truth. They chose truth, and with it came exile. Their departure wasn't just a logistical shift, it was symbolic. It revealed a monarchy frozen in time and a couple unwilling to shrink to fit its mold. The distance grew not just physically, but emotionally, publicly, irrevocably. But while they escaped the palace, they didn't escape the shadows. The crown still followed them across oceans, embedded in their names, their titles, their legacy. And as their new life began in California, the past refused to stay buried. Because no matter how far they ran, they were still tethered to a world that never truly let them go. They left the palace. They stepped away from the duties. But the titles, they stayed. Duke and Duchess of Sussex, 4 words that continued to echo through every news report, royal discussion, and whispered conversation across the globe. The monarchy had always thrived on symbolism, and nothing symbolized unresolved tension more than those lingering titles. Meghan and Harry might have crossed the Atlantic in search of peace, but those words still etched into official documents, spoken in interviews, and printed on invitations tethered them to a past they couldn't escape. And as time marched on, what should have been a clean break became a knot no one wanted to untangle. From the outside, it seemed simple. They left the firm, why not leave the titles too? But inside Buckingham Palace, nothing is ever simple. Titles aren't just ceremonial. They're woven into centuries of law, hierarchy, and power. They come with legacy, privilege, and in this case, complication. Removing a title isn't like changing a nameplate. It's a public political move with consequences that ripple through the institution. And King Charles knew this better than anyone. He understood that stripping the titles would ignite a storm far greater than any silence ever could. So, he chose the quiet path, a calculated move. Let the titles remain, not out of forgiveness, but out of strategy. It was a silent standoff, a message wrapped in diplomacy. By allowing Harry and Meghan to keep the Sussex titles, Charles avoided appearing vindictive. But at the same time, he kept control. It was a reminder: you can leave the palace, but you don't leave the monarchy untouched. And yet, this decision did little to silence the noise outside. The public erupted with opinions. Critics saw hypocrisy. Supporters saw restraint. Commentators dissected every royal press release. The media treated the titles like a ticking bomb ready to explode the moment one side stepped too far. For Meghan and Harry, the titles became both armor and burden. In America, they opened doors. They legitimized their projects, granted global attention, and turned them into royalty in exile. But with every benefit came a price. Every public appearance came with questions about the contradiction. How could they reject the system, yet still benefit from its titles? Were they using the monarchy they once condemned? Or were they simply trying to keep a piece of their identity alive in a world that wouldn't let them forget it? In private, the weight of the titles was heavier still. For Meghan, it meant never fully escaping the scrutiny. For Harry, it meant living in a suspended reality, no longer a working royal, yet still branded as one. Their children, too, became part of the conversation. Born into a lineage they never chose, marked by a title that would define them whether they wanted it or not. The palace remained silent, but the meaning behind the titles screamed louder each year. They weren't just labels, they were battlegrounds. Proof that while the couple had crossed continents, the war for identity, dignity, and closure was far from over. And as the world continued to debate their legitimacy, one thing was clear. The true conflict wasn't about titles at all. It was about love, loyalty, and a family still fractured beneath the crown. Because behind every formal address and royal decree, there was something more painful, a father and son, still searching for a way to heal. The silence didn't just crack, it erupted. With the release of Spare, Prince Harry unleashed a storm that no one in the royal family could ignore. The memoir wasn't a subtle retelling of events. It was an unfiltered, blistering account of a life behind palace gates. Page after page, Harry dismantled the illusion of fairy tale royalty and revealed something far darker. A young man drowning in grief, duty, and betrayal. For the first time, the world saw the monarchy not through tradition's polished lens, but through the eyes of the Spare, a boy who had never truly felt seen. But Spare wasn't the beginning. The groundwork for this emotional reckoning had been laid long before. In 2021, Harry and Meghan sat across from Oprah Winfrey and did what no royal had done before. They spoke freely, unscripted, uncontrolled. They told stories of racism, of isolation, of being silenced. Meghan revealed suicidal thoughts. Harry admitted a fractured relationship with his father and brother. The interview shocked the globe, but more than that, it shattered the royal family's most sacred rule: never speak about the crown from outside its gates. The allegations were explosive. That Meghan had been denied help during a mental health crisis. That unnamed members of the family questioned their unborn child's skin color. That Harry felt his father had stopped taking his calls. These weren't tabloid rumors. These were first-person confessions, raw, vulnerable, and aimed straight at the heart of the institution. And yet, the royal family's response was as chilling as it was calculated. A single statement. Recollections may vary. No apologies, no direct rebuttals. Just icy restraint behind polished smiles and well-rehearsed public appearances. But beneath the surface, everything had changed. Trust was eroded. Lines were drawn. And the monarchy, so skilled at weathering storms, suddenly looked fragile. The public watched in disbelief as one of their own had gone from prince to whistleblower. For Harry and Meghan, the backlash was swift. Support poured in from millions, but so did criticism. Many saw bravery in their decision to speak out. Others saw betrayal. But one thing was clear. They had crossed a line the monarchy never forgives. And yet, Harry didn't stop there. In Spare, he went further than ever before, recounting drug use, inner rage, and family dysfunction in excruciating detail. He described physical fights with William, coldness from Charles, and the hollow void left by his mother's death. His pain wasn't just about being a prince. It was about being a son who never truly felt protected. But exposing those truths came at a cost. Every page widened the divide. Every revelation turned a private wound into a global spectacle. And still, the crown remained silent, retreating further into tradition as Harry pushed deeper into vulnerability. What once might have been a path to reconciliation now looked like scorched earth. The gap between personal expression and royal discretion had become a chasm. And for the House of Windsor, known for controlling its narrative, this loss of control was more threatening than any scandal. Because Harry had done something the monarchy feared most, he made the people feel what it was like to be on the inside. The shame, the silence, the heartbreak. And as the world listened, the palace trembled. But the true tragedy wasn't what was said. It was what remained unsaid between father and son. Because with every word Harry shared, one question grew louder. Could this truth ever lead to healing? Or had the damage already run too deep? As the royal walls closed tighter, another loss loomed quietly on the horizon, one that would push the family further into sorrow and further from each other. The death of Queen Elizabeth II sent ripples. Through a nation, flags lowered, crowds wept, and for a moment, time itself seemed to pause. But behind the solemn tributes and global mourning, a more painful reality was playing out in private. The monarch who had held the royal family together like glue was gone, and in her absence, the cracks in the House of Windsor could no longer be disguised by crowns and ceremony. For King Charles and Prince Harry, This wasn't just the loss of a queen, it was the loss of the only person who had, for years, kept their bond from breaking completely. As the Queen's health began to fail, in September 2022, the royal family was summoned to Balmoral. It was supposed to be a moment of unity, but even that was fractured. While other senior royals were privately gathered, Harry was still in London, unaware of how quickly time was slipping away. When he finally boarded a plane to Scotland, he was alone. Meghan Markle, his wife and partner through every royal storm, was specifically asked not to come. The palace claimed it was a practical decision, but to Harry, it felt like another rejection, another message that she didn't belong, and that he, by extension, didn't either. By the time Harry arrived at Balmoral, the Queen had already passed. No royal escort waited for him. No warm embrace. The silence at the castle gates echoed the silence that had long existed between him and his family. It wasn't just the physical distance that stung, it was the spiritual exile. He had lost his grandmother, but more than that, he had lost the final thread that connected him to the family he was born into. Inside the castle, grief hung in the air, but so did tension. The Queen's death should have been a chance to heal. Instead, it became a mirror, reflecting back years of miscommunication, misunderstanding, and mistrust. Conversations were brief, glances were cold, and the one person who could have bridged the gap, Queen Elizabeth, was no longer there to speak the words that might have softened hardened hearts. Meghan remained in London, silent, dignified, and noticeably absent. She issued no statement, gave no interviews, and made no public appearance. But her absence said more than words ever could. It reinforced the idea that she was no longer welcome, and that Harry's place in the family came with conditions. For a man who had fought so hard to protect his wife, the choice he faced now was devastating. Grieve with the family who had shut her out, or stand alone. In those quiet days at Balmoral, Charles became king. But at what cost? His ascension came, not with celebration, but with sorrow and unresolved pain. And for Harry, standing in the shadows of tradition and legacy, the question became unavoidable. Could this shared moment of grief break down the walls between them? Or would it only reinforce them further? Because sometimes, it's not the words spoken during mourning that matter, it's the silences that follow. And as the crown passed from one monarch to the next, so too did the weight of fractured relationships, unspoken resentments, and the haunting question that lingered long after the Queen was laid to rest. Was reconciliation even possible? Or had they already drifted too far apart? The fracture between Prince Harry and the Crown wasn't just emotional, it became legal. What began as a royal exit quietly evolved into a fierce, high-stakes battle over one thing most royals never have to think twice about: protection. When Harry stepped away from royal duties, the institution responded by stripping his publicly funded security, a move that sent a clear message. You can't have both. You can't leave and expect to be shielded. But Harry wasn't just any former royal. He was the son of a king, the target of global scrutiny, and a man whose past trauma made the stakes far more personal. To him, this wasn't about entitlement. It was about survival. The ghosts of the past were never far from Harry's mind. He had walked behind his mother's coffin, seen what unchecked media obsession could do, and felt the cost of being unprotected. Now, as a husband and a father, he wasn't willing to gamble with the safety of his own family. When the UK government denied him the right to pay for his own police protection during visits to Britain, he took them to court. It was unprecedented. A prince suing the country he was born to serve. But Harry believed he had no choice. He had made peace with losing titles, privileges, and even his homeland, but he would not compromise on security. Not after what he had witnessed. The royal family stayed silent, but their stance was clear. In their eyes, stepping away meant stepping down. They argued that public security was reserved for active royals. The legal rationale was wrapped in policy, but the subtext was piercing. He was no longer one of them. And worse, the institution seemed content to let the courts handle what should have been a family concern. For Harry, this wasn't just bureaucratic red tape. It was a public confirmation of private rejection. In interviews, he didn't hide his anger. He spoke of ambushes, death threats, and the fear that history might repeat itself. Each time he set foot in the UK, he felt exposed not just to physical danger, but to the emotional weight of being cast out. His pleas weren't about fame or status. They were about responsibility. He didn't want special treatment. He wanted to protect his wife and children. And yet, every attempt he made was met with resistance. From the monarchy, from the state, from the very system his bloodline helped build. But behind the headlines and legal filings was something far more devastating. The realization that the bond between Harry and his father was unraveling with every passing court date. The man once known as the Spare had not only walked away, from his royal duties he was now fighting to be seen as worthy of protection. And King Charles, now holding the highest power in the land, had yet to intervene in a meaningful way. No public statements, no private resolutions, just silence, strategy, and more distance. This wasn't just a matter of law. It was a test of loyalty, compassion, and leadership. And with every legal blow, the path toward reconciliation grew colder. Because if a son couldn't count on his father to protect his family, what hope was there for trust to ever return? The courtroom battles were far from over, but within the palace, something more profound had already been lost. A father's promise, a family's unity, and perhaps the last chance to make things right. He never said the door was closed. In fact, time and again, Prince Harry reached for the handle, sometimes with hope, sometimes with desperation. Beneath the interviews and lawsuits, beyond the silence and scandal, lay a consistent truth. Harry wanted to reconcile, not with the institution, but with his father. The boy who once clung to his father's hand as the world mourned Diana was still inside him, still waiting to be seen. And in moments of vulnerability, milestone birthdays, private phone calls, even public statements, Harry sent out signals. He wasn't trying to destroy the monarchy. He was trying to salvage what little remained of his family. But for every olive branch extended, there was hesitation on the other side. King Charles, now under the weight of a crown, appeared torn. In private, sources claimed he expressed sadness, regret even. He missed his son. He longed for peace. Yet in public, his actions told another story. There were no official gestures of reconciliation, no grand invitations, just polite smiles during brief reunions and carefully choreographed appearances that screamed distance more than affection. The king's silence wasn't indifference, it was strategy. And in that strategy, warmth became a liability. Others tried to mediate. Princess Anne reportedly urged her brother to consider the emotional toll of ongoing estrangement. William, despite the deeper cracks in his own relationship with Harry, remained an unspoken wall between the brothers. Behind closed doors, senior aides floated the idea of a private summit, a neutral ground, a quiet talk. But every attempt was undone before it began. Distrust ran too deep. Wounds were too fresh. And then came the headlines. Every time Harry took a step forward, the media turned it into a weapon. When he praised his father's work on climate change, they called it manipulation. When he attended the coronation alone, they labeled it a stunt. Every action was dissected, twisted, and fed back into the royal machine. The press didn't just report on the feud, they fueled it. And in the war for public opinion, reconciliation became collateral damage. Still, Harry tried. On his end, the desire was real. But reconciliation, especially one that involved royal blood and global scrutiny, demanded more than sentiment. It required courage. It required risk. And most of all, it required both parties to admit the pain. But Charles, bound by image and legacy, could never quite bring himself to let go of control. And Harry, bruised by repeated rejections, began to question whether the family he loved was even capable of healing. The emotional weight of it all was staggering. A father longing for peace, but too bound by duty to reach out. A son still hoping for closeness, but forced to protect his own. And somewhere between the public appearances and private grief, the bridge they were both trying to build kept collapsing under the weight of expectation. And so, every step forward was followed by silence. Every moment of possibility became another missed opportunity. As the world watched and hoped, the question remained: could a bond once so strong survive so many fractures? Or were both sides simply pretending the bridge still stood, while walking in opposite directions, one step at a time? The silence between them remains, but it's no longer filled with rage. It's filled with exhaustion. King Charles and Prince Harry are now two men standing on opposite shores of the same history, watching the tide rise between them. After everything, interviews, revelations, funerals, and fleeting reunions, their relationship hangs in a fragile, uncertain space. Not completely broken, but no longer whole. Father and son, king and prince, symbols of an institution that commands reverence, yet is built on human fragility. The warmth that once existed hasn't vanished. It's simply buried under layers of hurt, protocol, and pride. Today, their communication is infrequent and often formal. Sources close to the palace describe a cold civility. No shouting, no dramatic confrontations, just an aching distance. Occasional texts, brief conversations through intermediaries. And when they do meet, it's often under the glaring spotlight of public events, where every glance is dissected, every gesture interpreted. The public still clings to hope for a reconciliation, but within the palace walls, that hope grows thinner. Both men are walking forward, but not necessarily toward each other. Still, the road ahead is anything but predictable. There are scenarios, delicate possibilities where reconciliation could take root. A serious health scare, a shared cause, or even the birth of another royal child could pull them back together. And yet, the more time passes, the more those openings seem to close. Every decision Harry makes from California, every Netflix special, every podcast, every book can either be seen as expression or provocation, depending on which side of the monarchy you're on. And Charles, bound by tradition and shadowed by the ghost of his mother's reign, remains cautious to the point of paralysis. Public opinion only complicates matters further. Some see Harry as a brave reformer. Others label him a traitor. And while the monarchy has always claimed to be above the noise, in today's digital world, no royal is ever truly shielded. Every move Charles makes toward Harry is scrutinized for weakness. Every move away is condemned as cruelty. The press doesn't just report on their estrangement, it shapes it. But if there is hope, it might lie not in Charles or Harry, but in the next generation. Princes George, Archie, Louis, and Princess Charlotte are growing up in a world very different from the one that shaped their fathers. A world that demands transparency, humanity, and connection. The old codes of silence are fading. And with them, perhaps, the rigid walls that kept so many royal relationships from healing. The seeds of reconciliation may not sprout in this generation, but the soil is being prepared by the one coming next. And beyond the personal, this story casts a long shadow over the institution itself. Because the fate of the monarchy no longer depends solely on pomp and tradition. It depends on something much older, much simpler family. If the royals can't fix what's broken among themselves, how can they hope to lead a nation that now demands authenticity over ceremony? In the ever-unfolding story of the House of Windsor, one truth remains clear. The crown may endure, but hearts are harder to preserve. And whether this chapter ends in reunion or quiet resignation will define more than just two men. It will shape the legacy of a dynasty already under strain. Because behind the pageantry and prestige lies the most powerful story of all, a family trying, and often failing, to love each other through it. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.